The salesman looked the man up and down, the worn jacket, the helmet under his arm, the boots that had clearly seen a road or two, and decided, in the time it takes to blink, that he was a waste of an afternoon. "The penthouse isn't available for viewing," he said. "It's spoken for. And between us, friend, even if it weren't, a small, polished smile, it's not really a tire kicker kind of property. 41 floors. You understand." The man in the jacket said he understood, and that he would still very much like to see it. The salesman's smile thinned. There were 2 other agents in the gallery and a couple touring the building, and he could feel them watching, and a man like Marshall Pace did not become the top seller at the Arden by letting people who did not belong waste his oxygen in front of an audience. "Sir, I'm going to be honest with you, because I think it's kinder." He folded his hands. "This isn't the place for window shopping. The full-floor residences here start at a number I don't think we need to say out loud. If you'd like, I can have someone walk you out, and there are some lovely public viewing decks downtown where you can get the view for free." He had said it just loud enough. The gallery had gone quiet. The man in the worn jacket did not get angry. He did not raise his voice. He looked at the salesman for a long, even moment, the way you look at someone you have decided to be patient with, and he said, quietly, "Before you call anyone to walk me out, let me tell you about the apartment you won't show me." What Marshall Pace did not know, what he could not have guessed from the helmet and the boots, was that every wall of that penthouse, every window, every inch of it had been built to this man's exact instructions. The wider hallway, the east-facing kitchen, the 18-inch window seat. He had not come to see the penthouse. He had come to make sure it was right, because he was the one who built it. There is a glass tower in downtown Los Angeles called the Arden. 41 stories of it, and on the day it opened it was the most expensive address in the city. The sales gallery on the ground floor was a temple to a certain idea of the good life. White stone, a model of the tower lit from within, a wall of glass looking out on the city the building meant to lord over. The agents wore suits that cost a month of an ordinary salary and spoke in the soft, certain voices of people who sell things that most people will never touch. The whole gallery was built to communicate one message to anyone who walked in. This is for a particular kind of person, and you will know very quickly whether you are that person. But there was a strange thing about the Arden, a thing the sales team gossiped about and did not understand. The penthouse, the 41st floor, the single most valuable piece of real estate in the entire building, was not a sleek glass showpiece like the rest of the tower. It had been built, on the explicit instructions of a buyer no one in the gallery had ever met, as a near-exact recreation of a small, old craftsman house. Low ceilings in places where the building could have soared. A kitchen with humble yellow tile. Counter set 2 inches lower than standard. A front room with a deep window seat and a railing on the terrace milled to match a wooden porch rail from God knew where. Square footage that any developer would have carved into a showpiece, given instead to a parlor and a reading nook and a hallway built wider than it needed to be. The sales team thought it was eccentric. A waste. They had a word for the buyer, whoever he was, the sentimental one, and they used it the way people who worship money use it, half joking, fully contemptuous. What none of them knew was that the tower they were so proud of had been built on the bones of a neighborhood, and that one of the houses bulldozed to pour its foundation had stood on the exact ground the lobby now occupied, a boarding house, a place where, almost 40 years ago, a broke young man with nowhere to sleep had been taken in by the woman who ran it, and fed, and believed in, and asked for nothing in return. The penthouse was that house, built again at the top of the tower that had erased it, and the man in the worn jacket had built it for her. The salesman who refused to show it to him was named Marshall Pace, and he was 58 years old, and he was drowning. To look at him, you would never have known. The suit was immaculate. The watch caught the light. He moved through the gallery like a man who had always belonged in rooms like this. And that was the whole point, because Marshall Pace had spent every morning for 9 years constructing a man who belonged and sending him out to sell. It had not always been a performance. There had been a time, and this was the thing that made the performance so exhausting, when Marshall Pace had been the real article. He had run his own firm, Pace Development, and built 3 towers of his own, and lived in a house in the hills with a view, and a wife, and a sense that he had figured the world out. He had been, briefly, exactly the kind of man the Arden was built for. Then the market fell in 2008, and it fell on him specifically. The leverage that had built him took him apart. The towers went to the banks. The house went. The marriage did not survive the year that followed, the year of selling the watches that were real and the cars that were paid for. The slow public unmaking of a man in a town that has no patience for the fallen. By 50, he had nothing, and a reputation as a cautionary tale, and a choice between disappearing and starting over at the bottom of the only thing he knew. So, he sold for other men in towers like the ones he used to build, to people who had what he used to have. And every single day he walked into that gallery terrified that someone would look at him a beat too long and see it. That the suit was 3 years old and pressed within an inch of its life. That the watch was the one real thing he had left. That the man who belonged was a costume worn by a man who had been thrown out of the very world he was now the doorman for. That was the wound, and it had a logic. A man who is secretly afraid he no longer belongs becomes the fiercest guard of the door. Deciding who else does not belong was the only thing that still made Marshall Pace feel like he was on the right side of it. Every scruffy time-waster he turned away was a small proof that he, at least, was still inside. So when a man in a worn jacket walked into his gallery, helmet under his arm, unbothered, asking to see the one apartment Marshall could never have afforded even in his best year, a man who plainly did not care about the suit or the watch or any of the things Marshall was barely holding on to. Every nerve in him stood up. He needed that man not to belong. He needed it more than he understood. The young woman who tried to stop him was the architect. Her name was Nadia Hart. She was 29, and she had spent 2 years of her life on the penthouse no one would let her be proud of. She was junior at the firm, the one they handed the strange unbuildable brief to because the senior people did not want it. Recreate this old house exactly. Here are photographs and an old woman's memory. Honor every detail. She had done it like scripture. She had tracked down the original yellow tile. She had set the kitchen window to the east because the client's instructions said, simply, she keeps African violets and they need the morning. She had widened the hallway because the instructions said the woman had used a walker the last few years and should never have to turn sideways in her own home. The sales team thought Nadia had wasted a fortune in square footage on sentiment. She thought it was the best thing she had ever done, and she had stopped saying so out loud because of the way they looked at her when she did. She happened to be in the gallery that afternoon, there to check a fixture, when she heard Marshall start in on the man in the jacket, and she crossed the floor fast. "Marshall, Mr. Pace, I don't think you should, Nadia." He did not look at her. "I've got this. Go check your light fixtures." "You don't understand. That's back to work, Nadia." And she watched him do it. Watched him decide a man's worth in 4 seconds in front of a whole room. Watched the old reflex of a place like this. The velvet rope, the sizing up, the polite cruelty, close over a man who had asked for nothing but to see a room. She went hot in the face. She thought about every time she had been made to feel like the junior one, the sentimental one, the one who did not quite belong, and she understood exactly what was happening. And she was junior. And she said nothing more. She would not have to. The man in the jacket was already speaking. "Before you call anyone," Keanu said, "let me describe the apartment you won't show me." The gallery had gone quiet. Marshall opened his mouth and then, for a reason he could not have named, did not speak. "The kitchen window faces east," Keanu said. "Not for the view. There's a better view on every other side. It faces east because the woman who's going to live there keeps African violets on the sill, and violets need the early light or they sulk." He turned slightly, as if he could see it through the floor above. "The counters are 2 inches lower than the rest of the building, because she's small, and she spent 60 years cooking at a counter that was always a little too high, and I didn't want her to spend the years she has left reaching." Nadia Hart had gone very still. "There's a window seat in the front room. 18 inches deep, because that's how deep the one in her old house was. The one she read in every evening for 40 years. The hallway's wider than code, because she uses a walker now, and I never again wanted her to have to turn sideways in her own home the way she did at the end, in the house this city tore down to build this one." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "The terrace railing is milled to match a wooden porch rail. The tile is the same yellow. There's a mark on the kitchen doorframe where she used to measure the heights of the kids who passed through her house, and there were a lot of us, and we copied it, scratch for scratch, from a photograph." The room was silent in a way the gallery had never been silent. "I know that apartment better than anyone alive," Keanu said, "because I drew up every instruction in it. It was built to my exact specifications. And the woman it was built for took me in off the street when I was 22 and had nothing, and asked me for nothing, ever. And I have spent my whole life trying to be worth what she saw in me." He looked at Marshall, and the question, when it came, was quiet. And it was not a trap. "So I'll ask you the thing I actually want to know. When I walked in here looking like I do, when there was nothing in it for you, was that the realest version of you I was ever going to get?" It was Nadia who said his name then, softly, into the silence, because half the room had already started to realize. But the name was not the thing that had emptied the air out of Marshall Pace. The thing that had done it was that he had recognized, in the description of a low kitchen counter, built so an old woman would not have to reach, a kind of caring he had not thought about in a very long time, and had once, a long time ago, before the fall, been capable of himself. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Keanu found him 10 minutes later, in a small back office behind the gallery, where Marshall had gone and shut the door and was standing at a window that looked at the wall of the building next door. Keanu knocked. Then he came in and sat down on the edge of the desk, lower than the older man, and waited. "I built 3 towers," Marshall said to the wall. He laughed, an awful sound. "Did you know that? Before I had a view, a real one. I knew what those counters cost. I knew what every inch of your penthouse cost, down to the dollar, the second you started describing it." He turned. His face had come undone, and I lost all of it. The towers, the house, my wife, I sell now, for other people, in buildings like the ones I used to put my own name on. And every day I walk in here and I'm terrified somebody's going to look at me too long and see that the suit's old and the watch is the last real thing I own, and I don't belong in this room any more then." He stopped. "Then the guy in the jacket." Keanu finished, gently. "Then the guy in the jacket. Marshall sat down heavily. I needed you not to belong. I don't even know why. I just needed it. Keanu listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not rush in to fix it. I know exactly why, he said, after a while. Because if a guy who doesn't care about any of it can walk in and belong, then the whole game you've been killing yourself to play might not be real. And if the game's not real, then you lost everything to a thing that wasn't real, and that's too much to carry. So you guard the door. It's the only thing that still tells you you're inside. He paused. I lost people, Marshall, not money, people, and for years I built walls too, and called it being careful. The wall never once kept the pain out. It just kept everything else out with it. Marshall pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. The woman the penthouse is for, Keanu said. Iris. She had nothing, by your math. A boarding house and a window seat and a kitchen too small for the people she fed in it. By the only number you've been measuring with, she was worth less than anyone who's ever walked into this gallery. His voice stayed even. And she is the richest person I have ever known. And it isn't close. You've been guarding a door against the only kind of person who was ever actually worth letting in. He let it sit. How many of them have you turned away? Standing right where you're standing now. Marshall closed his eyes. The script gives that a full breath. I'm not asking you to quit, or to find God, or to feel bad for the rest of the afternoon, Keanu said, standing. I'm asking you to go back out there and show the next person who walks in the same thing you'd show me now that you know who I am. That's all. The door doesn't have to mean what your worst year told you it means. Then he left. Marshall Pace came out of that office a different shape than he had gone in. He walked back into the gallery, where the afternoon had not moved, where Nadia stood near the model with her arms crossed and her eyes bright. He did not address the room. He went to her first. You tried to tell me, he said. Twice, and I told you to go check your light fixtures. He shook his head. You built the best thing in this entire building, and I called it sentiment behind your back, because the best thing in the building made me feel like the worst thing about myself. That's mine, not yours. I'm sorry, Nadia. Then he turned to Keanu. And I owe you one that isn't about your name, he said. Because I'd have done it to anybody who walked in here unbothered by all of. He gestured at the white stone, the lit model, the wall of glass. That's the part I have to fix. Keanu smiled. Not the careful one. The real one. Slow, crooked, unhurried. That's all I needed to hear, he said. One of the touring couple started to clap, uncertain, and then the other agents joined. And then it was the whole gallery, a sound that Whitestone Temple had certainly never made before. Applauding a salesman for telling the truth in a room built for lying gracefully. Nadia Hart wiped her eyes and did not bother to hide it. Keanu did not stay for it. He shook Marshall's hand, said something quiet to Nadia that made her laugh through the tears, and slipped out the glass doors and onto his motorcycle before anyone thought to take a picture. There was an old woman across town with a moving date, and he wanted to be the one to drive her, and he had never once needed to be in the room for the part where people clapped. It did not all turn around in an afternoon. The shame Marshall carried was 9 years deep, and you do not put down 9 years in one good cry. There was a stretch that first month where the old reflex came back hard. A man in a tracksuit wandered in one morning, and Marshall felt the whole machinery of contempt fire up before he caught it. Caught himself reaching for the polite cruelty, and had to stand very still behind the model until it passed. He did not always catch it in time. But he caught it more often than not, and then, more often than that. It was Nadia, of all people, who said the thing that held him, weeks later, over bad coffee in the gallery kitchen. He had asked her, half to himself, why she had fought so hard for an old woman's window seat when nobody above her cared. And Nadia had thought about it. Because the building's going to outlive everybody who's sneering at that penthouse right now, she said. In 50 years, nobody's going to remember what the lobby leased for, but somebody's going to find that mark on the kitchen door frame and wonder who all those kids were. That's the only part that was ever going to last. She shrugged. I'd rather build the part that lasts. Marshall thought about that for a long time. He did not become a saint. He stayed a salesman. Because a man has to eat, and he turned out to be a better one once he stopped sizing people up at the door. It turned out half the people he'd been brushing off for years had the money and had simply learned, the way the truly comfortable do, to stop dressing to prove it. But that was not the real change. The real change was quieter. He started taking the listings nobody wanted. The estates of the dead, the downsizing widows, the families selling the house they'd raised everyone in, the sales other agents found depressing, where the money was small and the feelings were large. He was good at those. He understood now what it was to lose the place that told you who you were. Nadia Hart's penthouse became, very quietly, a thing people in the city talked about, not in the magazines, because Keanu had asked that it stay out of them, but among architects, who came to understand that the most valuable apartment in the most expensive tower in Los Angeles was a poor woman's boarding house, rebuilt in the sky by a man who never forgot a kindness. It made Nadia's name. She left the firm 2 years later and started her own small practice, and she built, of all things, homes for people at the ends of their lives, designed around a low counter, a good chair, the morning light, the things that actually matter when the years get short. She had learned what was worth building from a brief everyone else thought was a waste. And Iris moved in, 91 years old, into the top of a glass tower, into her own kitchen with its yellow tile and its low counters and its east window full of morning, her violets on the sill within a week. She lived there 2 more years, and she had her Sunday suppers up there, 41 floors above the ground where her old house used to stand, the city laid out at her feet, and she fed everyone who came, the way she always had. The window seat was 18 inches deep, and she read in it every evening, and from up there she once told Keanu, you could see almost to the ocean. He drove her to those suppers when he was in town. He never sat at the head of the table. She would not have let him anyway. I've told a lot of stories on this channel. I keep coming back to this one. I think it's the counters that do it. 2 inches lower, so an old woman wouldn't have to reach. Of all the things money can buy at the top of a tower like that, the thing he spent it on was making sure someone he loved would not have to stretch for a coffee cup in the years she had left. The salesman could tell you the price of every inch of that apartment and had no idea what any of it was for. And I think most of us, if we're honest, spend more of our lives doing his math than we'd like to admit. Measuring the wrong thing, guarding the wrong door, deciding who's worth our time by what they're wearing when they walk in. I don't know that I'd have stayed as patient as he did, standing there being told to go look at the view for free. I'd like to think I would. But honestly, I'm not sure. Most of us aren't sure. And maybe that's the part worth carrying out of here. Not whether you could build someone a house in the sky, because almost none of us can, but whether you'd have measured Iris right if she'd walked into your gallery. That part, any of us can get wrong, and any of us can get right. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves' well-known reputation for never forgetting the people who were kind to him before the world knew his name. The tower, the salesman, and the boarding house are invented. The woman who takes someone in and asks for nothing, I hope you've had an iris. I hope you got the chance to build her something back. If this one reached you, drop a comment and tell me about your iris, the person who took you in before you were anybody. Share it with someone who measures people by the wrong number. If you want more stories like this, subscribe, and I'll keep telling them. See you in the next one.